Good evening and welcome to the Sound Off Show. My name is Linda Kirker. I host the program, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I think you're going to find this to be a unique and very interesting program tonight. As you know, if you watch regularly, I generally do a little opener of some topic, but tonight I decided we'll get right into talking with my guest, whom I think you will very much enjoy and learn from, and I think we'll have some stimulating conversation. So the phone number is on the screen as we move along in the show and get started. If you have an inclination to want to call in with a question or a comment, please feel free to do that. And with that, I'm going to introduce my guest. Many of you probably know him. His name is Tom Murphy. Welcome.
Welcome, Linda. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. I don't get to see you very often these days. You're a busy man.
Yeah, well, I have been, and I have to correct your monologue in the beginning.
Go right ahead.
I don't know if anyone's going to learn anything from me.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I was a struggling student growing up, and I'm not sure I'm qualified to teach anything, but I certainly can pass on some of my experiences to other people.
Don't be modest.
No.
I know you do super things and probably help a lot of people in your way. And I think that's admirable. I respect you for that. You care about people. That's the important thing. I really believe that.
Well, Linda, my life, and I only really started talking about this a couple of years ago, but I was born and raised in Philadelphia, and my parents ran a mission home.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and it wasn't a state-run home. It was just my parents had the proclivity to open their doors to people that were really in trouble. And,
wow.
And I tell people I could write a book about my brothers and sisters, and most of the stories don't have happy endings. But I saw a lot of people that struggled through life, and I think that those early seeds that were planted, and then as I have grown up, whatever the heck that means,
it's a process.
It's a process. I found myself in a very unique position back in 2013-14, spending a lot of time in public school systems, reconnecting with a lot of young people that were very similar to the people that I grew up with that had some challenges. So, that's been it's been a true blessing to connect with so many young people, especially that have so many struggles.
Well, and interesting that from your youth at your home, with your parents' work, with people who needed help, that you today have kind of absorbed that in your thinking and feelings, perhaps, and you want to be of service in a similar way to what your parents were doing. That's really interesting.
Well, it's funny, the things that are modeled for you.
Very important. By
your parents, it's funny the way they come back to get you. I guess good and bad, right?
Yes, and that is why it's so important for parents to be the role model, a positive role model for their children. Nobody's perfect. We all have our foibles, our shortcomings, and whatever. But to try as a parent to be the best example and role model of being a decent human being and, that type of thing. Yeah. But tell me this, one of the things I've been wondering, Tom, what age level do you go to schools all over the country?
Yeah, my speaking partner and I, Rick Yarish, who September 1st, 2006 was in Iraq, and an improvised explosive device was detonated underneath his Bradley, which is like a small tank, and 70% of his body was burned away. But if Rick were sitting here with us, he'd tell you it's the best thing that ever happened to him, and he wouldn't change it for anything.
I believe it.
And he just wouldn't have had the opportunity to give hope to the amount of kids that he has over the last 10 years with our organization. But, we primarily started with middle and high school students because that's the group I started speaking to about 12 or 13 years ago. I started talking to young people, about sports things. My life, part of it has been crafted by the coaches that I've had, not just in sports, but in business and other areas of my life, education. And I found myself talking to young people and giving them lessons on motivation, goal setting, those kind of things. And it was very rewarding, and I felt that I was truly having an impact. And then my partner in the organization, not Rick, Rick's my speaking partner, but my partner in the organization is a fellow that I wrestled with in college.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
And he saw me speak to several sets of kids 12 or 13 years ago. And he called me in a panic one day, and he said, "Tom, I need your help. I was in charge of an assembly," and he's got about 300 kids per grade level.
Whoa.
Yeah, big school. And in the middle school, they had about 1,000 kids. And he said, "I need your help. I was in charge of an assembly. The speaker fell through last minute." He said, "Do you think you could do something on bullying for me?" And I said,
Is he a teacher?
He's an educator, yes.
Okay,
He's
okay.
Been in the game for about 25 years now in education. And I picked this crazy name called Sweethearts and Heroes, which is very purposeful.
Sure.
And it has purpose behind it. And I went, and really the initial assembly was just to honor him as a friend of mine and as an educator, and to talk about his superhero abilities, because I truly believe that that's what educators are. They're superheroes. And another school was there, and they said, "Wow, that was amazing. Could you do that at our school?" And we really had no idea what we were unleashing. And now, 12 years later, we've crisscrossed the country. We've spent a lot of time in the Northeast because Rick is in Binghamton. I'm here. We spend a lot of time in New York. I think we've been in over 800 schools in New York.
Wow.
Yeah, and but to answer your question, primarily we started with middle and high school. But honestly, I find the most important work that we do, this could be an argument, it could be a discussion, is with elementary school students. I love being with middle school and high school students. That's really my sweet spot because I just connect well with those kids. But truly the greatest work that I believe and the greatest impact we can have is training young people, young elementary school students, in the methodology that we've developed.
Well, I think it's awesome what you are doing. I can't believe that you just go all over the country and offer this service that is this connection that is so critically important to the lives of young people. And I wish I could go along. I just love young people and of all ages. And I think that there's a great need for what you're doing. And I think that those who are exposed and participate in the youth that are involved are so fortunate to have that perspective and that opportunity and that learning process. How long do you spend, if you're at a given school, how long are you given to spend with the, let's say, fourth graders or third and fourth graders, or however you do it?
Sure. Well, every school is different. It's always a challenge. Rick and I think since 2014, we're in no less than 100 schools per school year. I think last year we were in 120 in the school year.
Wow.
So typically it's a school every day of the week. We leave on Sunday nights and get home Friday nights and have a few minutes at the restaurant on Saturday and then pack up and leave again. But every school is different. To answer your question, we may be at a K-12 school, so we spend all day breaking up our time. It's a tough day. I mean, we'll spend time from 6:30 in the morning speaking to students, might be elementary school students, young elementary schools, students K through 2. We may go into a 3-5 group. We have a specific lesson for both of those groups. Then we'll talk to middle school students and high school students. And then after school, we talk to teachers. We provide a tremendous amount of teacher value.
Wow.
And then we usually finish up in the evening with parents. And so usually it's about 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., 9 p.m., with almost no break, sometimes no lunch, with groups of kids. And then we get in the car and drive to the next school and get wherever we're going at about
Wow.
midnight, and then we start over.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a huge commitment.
Yeah, it's something that I've wrestled with, about 200 days a year on the road since 2014. And I did some writing on this and just did some interview stuff with a series that we're working on. And I felt more emotional about it than I've ever felt, really reflecting back, especially now that things have slowed down with the whole COVID issue. And I had some pretty deep thoughts about the sacrifice that I've made, even around my own children. I mean, there was a tremendous, if you think about 2014 to today, that's 6 years.
Yeah.
And I missed a lot with my own kids. And
Well, you know what? Life's about balance.
yeah,
And, you know, you're needed at home, too. You have your own children to consider, you
Yeah.
know, and your wife, of course. And you have a business, Twig's Restaurant, right
Yeah.
in the heart of St. Albans.
I'm the janitor. I don't know if it's my business, but I'm officially, my title's the janitor.
I see, okay.
Yeah. I get in big arguments about that because people say, well, who's the owner? And I say, well, who pays for those lights to be on? And people look at you like, huh? And I say, who pays for that music to play? And I usually tease it out of them, and most people think it's funny when I say that, but I truly believe with all my heart that the people that come in and sit in those chairs own that restaurant. You know, I don't say this patting myself on the back, but I really have never taken a paycheck in 10 years from that place. And it's not my place of employment. I have a job, and now I talk to kids for a living, and I believe with all my heart that the community and the people that sit in that chair own that restaurant. So it's just kind of a different way of looking at it.
It is. It's a very different
Yeah.
way of looking at it. But your wife works there, too?
No, not one day.
Oh, really?
Not one day in 10
Your
years.
daughters do, though, don't they?
Abigail runs the joint. She's spent time there since she's been about 12 or 13.
Wow.
And she was a hostess and moved up to a waitress and then did a little managing work. And then we had an opening when the general manager left us a couple of years ago. And I kicked the little bird out of the nest and I said, it's your turn now. So she had some real trepidation in the beginning.
Sure.
But, you know, I think together we're figuring it out. I think the dynamics of dad and boss are a lot tougher than people realize because I have to learn to handle her differently than I've ever handled her before. And that's, I think it's a bigger learning experience. I don't
For
think,
you.
Yeah, I don't think we have kids to teach them. I think this is an interesting concept. And most people think you have kids to teach them and to help them grow. But I truly believe that when you have children, if you really pay attention, they can teach you more
Well,
than you're teaching them.
It's a balancing, yeah, it works
Yeah.
both ways.
Yeah, and I just think Abigail especially has taught me more than I've probably taught her.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, she has a wonderful structure for the type of business or even the skills that could be applied elsewhere
Yeah.
if she so chose. So it's nice that she's interested in the business.
Yeah, well, I worry about that one too. I think there's a little bit of guilt attached to it where she's trying to help me out, and but you know she does a great job. But all of our children work there. I think you'll find this interesting too.
How many is that?
All four of them have worked there.
Okay.
Isabel's been there since she's been about 10, but a couple of years ago she took a big leap off the diving board and joined the Air Force.
Oh.
So Isabel has pretty much a full-time job working on the F-35s.
No kidding.
Yep, she's a crew chief, and
Oh, wow.
she literally changes the engines on those planes in Burlington.
Oh, my gosh.
Talk about a strong young woman.
Mechanical?
Yeah. So she has her pilot's license, but her ultimate goal is to fly jets. So
Good for her.
yep. And then Claudia, kind of the toughest of the group, is the only. She just graduated from boot camp in the Marine Corps, and she's the only woman in her unit. Yeah, think about that one. She
Wow.
called the other day and was talking to her sister about having to carry a man that was 6'5". So she's...
Was this part of the training, or?
Yeah, she completed boot camp, and now she's at Camp Geiger, I believe, which is in North Carolina. And but she wanted to join the infantry. She wanted to pick the toughest thing she could do and try and do it.
Good for her.
Yeah, so there's not that many women in the infantry.
Your girls,
Yeah.
your daughters, got that kind of toughness.
From their mother. Don't put that in my mouth.
Oh, well, it may be a joint effort.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would like to
I believe, honestly, I'm saying this, I've talked to my wife many times, and I just, I don't know how she's put up with me for so long. And,
Well, I was going to say to you, and God bless you, I really appreciate and respect what you're doing, going out on the road for days at a time, months at a time, but life's about balance.
yeah, I'm working on that one.
Okay, I'll give you a lecture on that
Please.
after. But anything else you want to say about what we're talking about now before we get back into?
I think it's worth mentioning this pandemic and the restaurant, and I
Oh, yeah.
have done even some lecturing on this as Sweethearts and Heroes last year. We spent, I said we do about 100 schools per school year, and up to the pandemic, I think we were in 52 or 53 schools, and then we got the call and said every school's canceled. And it was kind of a devastating blow, because that meant Rick and I had to cancel over 50 schools that we were supposed to be in through the end of the winter and through the spring into June.
Yeah, that's an adjustment.
Yeah, it was really difficult. And so immediately we pivoted. I think that's the term people use. And we put out there to about 300 different schools that we have very strong relationships with. We said, hey, we'd love to connect what they call synchronously with your students in their houses, with their parents and their teachers. And it really was an unbelievable tidal wave. I think in 2.5 months, I did over 100 Zoom calls. And my wife could attest to me in the office, and sometimes it was 3 to 5 calls a day in a row. And just different groups of kids, from high school kids to middle school kids. We had calls with 100+ kids at a time. And
They wanted to talk with you personally?
yeah.
Wow.
So Rick and I made ourselves available, and there was a lot of discussion. But I guess one of my points about the restaurant is I found myself talking about that. And it's not something I talk about a lot on the road, but kids will figure out who you are. Like if you go speak in their school, they'll know sometimes more about you than you know about yourself, because they'll just investigate you online. And very early on, I had some kids say, well, what about your restaurant? And I was like, I guess I should talk about that. And we could spend the next 2 hours, and I really tell people I could write a book on this subject.
Well, you've said several times when you were speaking about different things that you could write a book.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to suggest that you write a book.
I've got a couple in motion.
Oh, good.
We just have one come out. It's for teachers, and it's
Fantastic.
part of our professional development. It's called the 13 Pillows, like pillars, of highly affective, not effective, but highly affective teachers. And we deliver.
They affect
Yeah.
students.
Yeah, it's truly about connecting the hands through, which is the psychomotor domain, right, through the heart, which is the affective domain, to the cognitive domain.
Yep.
And so that's the only way to truly educate is through the affective domain. But I found myself talking to a lot of young people about the restaurant because, that was an industry that was arguably hit the hardest.
Oh, yeah.
And not just shutdowns, but, just the reduction in number of people going out. And Twigs didn't have that issue. We've never done any takeout and delivery. Maybe a little bit of takeout, but never any delivery. And 2 days before the pandemic, I just sat on my couch thinking about what the heck we're going to do. And this wonderful story that came to my mind in 1915, Enterprise, Alabama, where this agricultural pest wiped out the cotton crop, and everyone was dependent on cotton in Enterprise in 1915. And it didn't matter. I mean, over half of the families were farm families, but everyone, store owners, clothing manufacturers, everyone depended on the cotton. And this little agricultural pest called a boll weevil. Oh, yeah. It's spelled B-O-L-L. Wipes out the cotton crop. And, this is 1915.
They were dependent on it.
In 1915, where the Red Cross and the government doesn't come in and hand you a bunch of checks and say, you'll be okay.
Right.
You were probably going to starve or have to move or something. And, so what did the people in Enterprise do? They got together as a community. And they had conversations, and they didn't argue and fight. They just had conversations. And one of the folks in this community center said, well, I noticed that these little pests didn't eat my tiny little peanut patch that my kids have. And then someone else said, well, I got a pretty big peanut patch, and they didn't affect my peanuts. And then another guy got so excited, he jumped up and he said, let's grow peanuts. And someone else said, that's a dumb idea. Like, why would we do that? We'd have to, redo everything in hundreds of acres of cotton fields. But they had consensus, and they went and planted peanuts. And by 1919, or 17 or 19, Enterprise, Alabama was the largest producer of peanuts in the world.
Isn't that interesting?
And if you go to Enterprise today, in the corner of College and Main Street, there's a monument taller than this room, and at the base of it, and there's a big bug on top of this monument. I think it's the only place in the world where there's a monument dedicated to an agricultural pest. And at the base of the monument, it says, in profound appreciation of the boll weevil and what it has done as the herald of prosperity. So I had that flash through my mind as I sat on my couch 2 days before the shutdown, and arguably this virus is like a bug, and it was infecting everything.
Right.
And truly their greatest setback was just an opportunity for their greatest comeback. And so, I came up with one idea. I bet we could serve some family meals. And so I wrote them up, and I went down to the restaurant, and I kicked those kitchen doors open literally, and I was like, look what we're going to do. And I heard this big sigh because for days I had employees calling me. There were several in tears saying, what are we going to do if we shut down? How am I going to feed my children? So when I got this collective sigh, like, what's this crazy guy doing? But they trusted the process. They got on board, and we safely delivered meals to the community. And we were busier than we've ever been in the history of the restaurant.
Wow.
Now, I don't think we had the same revenue stream because no one's inside and they're not having a beverage. But we really met our goal, and we had one goal, and that was to keep people employed, and we did that through serving the community. And it's just a wonderful story. That's the short version of it.
I think that's... Oh, we have a caller.
Oh, geez.
Caller, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, good evening, Linda. Is this an open show, or do you have a particular subject you're talking about?
Well, we're primarily focusing on what Tom is doing with his life, but if you have a quick question or comment, go ahead.
Well, it's going to be a general comment. It's going to be what's going on in the country here with this Black Lives Matter thing. and it's not really about Black Lives Matter nor Donald Trump. It's basically to overthrow this government and take away this government that we currently have.
Well, you know what, Norm? That's a hot topic, and there's a lot to be said about that. There's a lot happening regard to that, and what I'm going to suggest is that you and I have a conversation, and I'll have you come on the show, and we will discuss that because it deserves discussion. How's that?
It's getting close to home here. It's now in Burlington. They're starting to have uprisings, and it's only a matter of time. And I've been saying that right along. And of course, you've heard me say for 5 years that everything is backwards. The cop goes to jail, the criminal hits the street. That's what it's like today.
Yeah, there are some huge problems going on, and I would just say this one thing, that I have wondered what kind of preparation the state of Vermont is doing just in case we have to face what has happened in other places. But I appreciate your call, and I appreciate your watching the show, and I think that tonight we'll focus on what Tom is doing, but I will give you a call. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. Well, when he's done and he hangs up, I'd love to make a comment.
Okay. You don't want to make it now?
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit longer.
Oh, okay.
But I'd love to make a comment about, what just flashed through my mind when...
Go ahead.
Okay, sure. So, and be patient with me here.
I'll try.
This is it's an organic thought that's been growing in my brain. My partner Jason, who started this with me, has lost 6 kids in 25 years. Students.
What do you mean he's lost them?
To their own hands. Suicide.
They've taken their own... students, not his own children.
No, students.
Oh, my gosh.
And, Evan, who we spoke a lot about this morning when we were with a group of teachers, we did some professional development this morning. That's how I started my day at 8 o'clock this morning, was talking to some teachers that are getting ready to kick the school year off. And, imagine the position that teachers are in right now. And, we can argue about unions and all kinds of different issues. But these are the people that are in charge of our children. And there's a lot of young teachers that live with mom and dad and grandparents and are just as scared about taking a virus home from a kid and infecting their loved ones. And so there's a lot of value to think about that. But, in terms of this specific topic, the one thing that I find myself talking about more than anything is this destructive decision, suicide. And since 2007, suicides in 10 to 14-year-olds have doubled. And it's not something we're talking about enough in North America. The number one thing last year to take a middle schooler out of this country, the number one thing has always been car accidents in your lifetime. Last year, there was a point when that number was overtaken by their own hands. Like in your lifetime, you'd have never predicted the number one thing to kill a middle schooler would be themselves.
No.
And I could talk about it for the next 6 hours if you gave me time. But it really comes down to one thing.
I'm curious.
People say why. And if you understand why 22 service members take their own lives every single day, it's the same reason. It's the same reason. They feel hopeless. They feel, now follow me here, like they can't hold on to the possibilities that exist. HOPE, hold on, possibilities exist. That's how they feel. That's why 22 service members do it every day. And now we have our children that feel more hopeless than ever before in human history. Now you say, well, what leads a kid to hopelessness? It's the same thing that leads a service member. You need food, shelter, and water, right, to live.
Well,
right?
those are the, yeah.
Right. But what do you need after that? Like, what does it mean to be human? And we all need two things. And you and I sat here talking before the camera went on. Every person, the fellow that's on the phone, me, you need some kind of meaning or purpose in your life.
Absolutely.
That's what you need, right? Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear any how." People that don't feel like they have meaning. See, I've seen something that most people have never seen. I spent the last 8 years of my life with someone who was a soldier, a football player, a leader of men, and in the blink of an eye, it was taken from him.
Yep.
Every bit of his meaning, his purpose in life evaporated.
Rick.
So I've seen him rebuild meaning and purpose, and he has that now.
And you helped him.
Well, I was there to be involved with it.
Yes.
But that's the first thing we all need. And if I look at kids today, I'm going to wrap it into what our caller said here, and I'll give you my rendition on Black Lives Matter and what's really happening. Number 2, human acceptance. Now, we're pack animals. We know, we can look at the data. Humans that are isolated for 3 days will have measurable amounts of brain damage. It's the worst form of torture imaginable. Isolation, right? Look at any mammal. If you don't allow it to socialize and connect, it destroys its life. It just literally will destroy its life. So when you look at Rick's story, Rick was accepted by a lot of adults, and thank goodness that we fixed that from the Vietnam War. But 25% of the population is like 10 years and under. Children were terrified of Rick. He was the monster that lived under their bed.
Because of his appearance.
That's right. So little kids ran from him in terror, hid behind their moms, and he didn't feel accepted.
Right.
So that's the 2 core reasons that service members will take themselves out of this world. They feel like they don't have meaning or purpose, or it's changed so dramatically that you and I can't understand. And number 2, they don't really feel accepted because of what they've gone through.
Well, yeah, they've lost limbs, they're in
That's right.
wheelchairs, maybe they don't have an arm or legs, and I mean, I cannot imagine what kind of strength and personal acceptance of where they are at this point in their lives, and realizing that they still have value as a human being and that they're lovable.
That's right.
That's so critically important.
Now we have children that are in that same boat. We have a crisis of meaning in this country. In the most technologically advanced civilization Earth has ever known, I talk to them. We have millions of kids across this country that don't feel like they have much meaning in their life. And the amount of acceptance that kids are searching for is a struggle. Now follow me here. I have spent the last decade of my life talking to young people. And I get in an auditorium full of 1,000 kids. And after I'm done speaking, those kids come and find me because we touch buttons inside of them that say, I want meaning. I want to be accepted. Now, those are the kids I've found and talked to in empty auditoriums with tears rolling down their cheeks with no one around. For a decade of my life, I could tell you 1,000 stories. I have most of them written down. Every time I meet a kid that's got that struggle, dad's in prison, has been sexually abused, and they're marginalized by everyone. And they become those weird kids. Now, when we had, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm a little afraid to do this, but I'm going to, because I just have to comment on what he said.
Okay.
When I turn on my TV, I didn't notice this at first, and I watched some of this stuff. We had a little demonstration here in the park. Now, I did what I thought was the responsible thing. I heard about it, and I went over and I sat in the park. And I just listened with my silly free hug shirt on. I just sat there and listened because I figured it was my responsibility to just figure out whether I agreed with it or not. It didn't matter. I just wanted to hear. And truthfully, I felt a little bad because it wasn't very organized. And
What
people
wasn't very
just the get together in the park. They just passed a microphone around and they said a few things, and there was some chanting, and then someone screamed, "Let's go down to Main Street." And there was probably over 100 people up in that park. And when they shouted that, I just figured that was, like, I had no agenda to go stand on Main Street and yell and chant and stuff like that. I'm going to get to my point here. And neither did probably half of the people. So some people just dispersed like me. I went back to the restaurant and stood there, and about 40 or 50 came down to Main Street. And they stood on the sidewalk, and they did some chanting, and there was some horn blowing. And imagine some people were in support of the group there, and some people were blowing their horn because they were not in support. Whatever. I'm not here to, that's not
Judge.
my issue.
Yeah.
Then a few people came down Main Street on the side twigs, and it was just 6 or 7 people. And they had an agenda to yell across how they felt. And whether it was all lives matter, whatever they were yelling, they yelled across. And then it got really ugly. There was some screaming back and forth, and it was just the profanity that went back and forth. And I just stood there, twigs, and just watched. And then it happened. They were stretching north towards Jeff's. And on the end, on the south end, closest to me, across the street by the crosswalk, there was a young lady. And she caught my attention for a couple reasons. She had a black pants on, a black half shirt, a black mask, and blonde hair. But the half shirt caught my attention because she was so thin. And I was like, but the ferocity that was coming out of her, it was like it was like her feet were attached to the curb, and she was just whipping. And when she whipped, like, the things that were coming from her, the anger at these people that were challenging her belief structure, like, it was just like, I can't even describe, like, I just remember standing there thinking, where's that coming from? Like, she's so thin, and it was like almost violent, like the way she was like, ah. And I just stood there and watched this whole thing unfold. Whether I agreed or disagreed, it really is irrelevant to me. The same thing as when I went to the park. And some people say, well, no, Tom, you should have an opinion. I really didn't want to. I wanted to be open. And then it happened. Her head pivoted, and she looked at the restaurant, and she stopped like that. And it was her here, a bunch of diners here, and me against the wall by the jewelry shop. And her head pivoted and turned towards me, and it was like she was a robot. She did like a right face like you would see in the military, and she walked to the crosswalk. And then she didn't even look right or left. It was like she was caught in a tractor beam, and she was pulled across right to our side of the road. And it was really eerie. And I remember I was like in a movie, and it was like silent. And they were still yelling over there at both sides, and I was just looking at her, and she made eye contact with me. And as she got closer to our side of the street, I could see tears streaming down her face, and they were just welling up in her mask. And then she started to walk again, and she walked through the center of all those people, and she walked right up to me, and she was about 2 feet from me. And she just looked at me, and I didn't know what to do. And she pulled her mask down, and she said, "You came to my school. You saved my life."
Oh, my.
And I didn't know what to say. And she said it again. She goes, "You saved my life. Will you hug me?" And this is a young lady who was just on the other side, and I opened my arms up, and I put my arms around her, and she put her head on my chest right here. And there was just like silence. And she cried, and I looked across the street, and this is when I figured it out. And you turn your TV on, you'll see them. All of those people are primarily in their 20s, 30s.
young.
Now, many of those kids are the kids, just like in the auditorium, that were marginalized, that were picked on, that colored their hairs and put piercings, trying to figure out who they are and who they want to be. And you know what they found in this Black Lives Movement? They found meaning and purpose, and they're accepted. Like, we let them down, Linda.
Well,
10 years ago, we let all those kids down, and they flew under the radar.
When you say we, are
the system.
The schools?
And everybody.
The parents?
Now, listen, Einstein figured this out. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to get so heated about this, and it has nothing to do with you, but Einstein figured this out. He said this world is a dangerous place to live, not because of evil people, but because of those who choose to do nothing about it. You know who the problem is? It's you, and it's you, and it's me. Everyone that doesn't do anything about it, you're the problem.
That's why I do the show.
I know you do, Linda. So if someone asks me and they want to have this conversation, I've never really even spoken this out loud, really.
Are you?
But if somebody wants to have the conversation about Black Lives Matters with me, like, it's irrelevant to me. Because you know what? Those people have found meaning in their life, and they're accepted.
But
why didn't we accept them years ago?
Well, that's a great question. But they are vulnerable to somebody who has a cause.
For sure.
And they can be led
For sure.
into doing whatever that
For sure.
person wants.
And so were the kids when I was in school that got into the group of the potheads will accept anyone.
Yeah.
Like, open up, come on in. We'll smoke pot together and have a good time.
Well, speaking of pot, do you think that these youth that you say so many of them have taken their own lives, do you think that they were into the drug scene? Is that a way?
I think that's one destructive decision out of many. I think we could talk about that separately, and that's one destructive decision. But I don't think it's because of drugs. I think it's because of what's happened to their lives.
Well, I think these young people are maybe hurting and need a purpose, and they're easily led
Sure.
by whomever, whether it's a good cause or it's not a good cause.
But that's happened through all of history. It happened in the 60s. In the 70s.
Yeah.
Like, nothing has changed.
But
what's changed is we let them down. That's what changed.
Initially, before they got to where they are now. But there's only so much I can do.
I know.
I can talk. I raised my children.
Yeah.
And I had an effect on my grandchildren,
Sure.
I like to think, about work ethic, personal responsibility,
Amen.
accountability.
Amen.
Making your life count.
Amen.
And enjoying, finding out what makes you happy.
Yeah.
And then whether it's playing sports or whatever it might be, music, art, whatever it might be, that gives you a sense of accomplishment
Sure.
and so forth. But what is the underlying causation?
It's hopelessness.
Yeah,
They
but
feel
what creates?
hopeless.
But why?
I just told you. Like, these kids, these people are searching for meaning in their life.
Is it because
and acceptance.
they haven't had a role model in their lives?
I think that's one thing.
Someone to love them?
And I don't mean to cut you off, but when you think about hopelessness, it's like this big cauldron of really awful, nasty stuff. And you can't point your finger at one thing. Yeah, it's because there's been a lot of really crummy dads and a lot of moms that have had to try and do it on their own. But the reasons are just there's so many. I mean, like, we could list so many things that lead a kid to hopelessness. And it's never one thing, usually. We can talk about meaning and purpose and human acceptance, but it's like Swiss cheese. Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in I think it's Outliers. But, like, the holes have to line up. No, I think it's Tipping Point. But the holes have to line up in order for a kid to truly make a destructive decision. It's never just one thing that causes a kid to make a destructive decision. And I hope you don't take this personal, because it's not meant that way.
No.
I mean, for me, this is the point I've gotten to in my life, is that, my job, is to really point some of this stuff out. Like, why is this happening? And we can blame and point the finger all we want, but the truth is, until we start raising, who was it, Mandela or Gandhi, that said, like, you can judge a society by the way that it raises or treats their children.
Yep.
And, like, this is what we've done to our children. At first, they were eliminating themselves at an unprecedented rate. And it used to be suicide, but now it's homicide. When I look at what happened in Parkland, Florida a couple of years ago, I talked about this religiously with people. And I said, listen, Nicholas Cruz was about as hopeless as they come. And people say, no, Tom, he's a monster. I say, oh, yeah? Well, who brought him a hot chocolate in the 5th grade? Who asked him to go to the movies in the 7th grade? Who helped him build meaning in his life?
All right, I have a question.
Yeah, sorry.
That's
I get
all right.
excited about this guy. Not excited. It's just, there's nothing more important to you than your grandkids or your children.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah, right.
So then, but these are
how does a society at large groom these children? It's not a good word, but prepare these children for a positive life, a fulfilling life, a good feeling about yourself, productivity, feeling loved, and so forth, and then being able to share love. And basically, it comes down to the structure of the family, and then reinforcement in the schools.
Yeah.
Okay? And if you have, like, I think I'm getting a little off
No, I don't think you're off at all.
course here.
I don't think so at all.
But what I'm thinking about is when,
Like, what's the solution?
well, hold on a sec. Well, that's it. It's how do you create good family, families that are responsible and raise their children with the essentials that are important to a person growing up and feeling important and valuable and loved and productive and all of these things that that are necessary, because life can be tough. even when you get
life
those.
is tough.
Yes,
Yeah.
even when you grow up in a family where you feel loved and taught and so forth, and prepared for life. There are always things that come into your life that make you do a double take and wonder, how am I going to get through this? Because
Yeah.
I've been there. I'm sure you've been there, and probably the viewers have been there. But this all starts at a young age.
Yeah.
And, we have about 12 minutes.
That's fine.
And what was I going to say that I got sidetracked on?
That's my fault. I
No,
do
it
that. I do
isn't.
that to everybody.
No, it's my. No, something about.
Well, I think you're talking about, like, you were talking about the family structure and how do we get back to a family that's teaching these lessons, teaching kids to be brave, teaching kids to be courageous.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. I learned recently that in middle school, the school nurse has condoms in her office for 12-year-olds. Now, somehow, we need to reach our young people and get the message to them that being sexually active at a young age is not productive. It's not a positive for your life in general.
Whose fault is that, Linda?
That the condoms are in the school?
For sure.
Well, it's not my fault.
Whose fault is it?
I'm talking about it,
Yeah.
so people know, and hopefully the parents will go or the school board.
Well, it's funny.
Whose fault is it?
Well, it's funny. I do a lot of parent work, and I'm not a great parent. I've just met a lot of great parents, and I've made a lot of mistakes. And one of the common questions I always get is, like, when is it appropriate for me to get my son or daughter a cell phone? And I have a friend of mine who wrote a book called Disconnected, and it's a great book if anyone's listening. And I think you can get it on Amazon. It's a small read. I think it's not comparable to Gene Twangy's book iGen, but his comment is this, and I've used it. When is it appropriate to get him a cell phone? When you're ready for them to watch hardcore pornography. And for most kids, that means single digits.
Wow.
Single digits today. Now, I was at a school in South Colony, New York a couple of years ago, and I learned stuff from young people all the time. And a young lady and I were having a discussion, and she said, Mr. Murphy, you know what's interesting? When we were 2 or 3, our parents gave us this device, and they thought it was cute. Like when we could use it better than they could, and when we were fast, you called your sister, your mom, or your wife, and you said, "Oh my God, you should see Becky. She's so good at that. She's better than I am." Mm-hmm. And then she said this, a 10th grader, and she said, when we turned 9 or 10 and we were really annoying, our parents were like, "Here, take this." And then when we were 14 and we were acting how we were supposed to act as teenagers, they tried to control us with it. "I'm going to take that from you." So when you want to talk about that content that kids are absorbing, that it's one of the reasons that causes them to get into that kind of activity, because now they're looking at it at a younger and younger age. Who put the phone in their hands? We did.
Well, I didn't.
I know you did. I'm not talking. When I say we, I mean the collective.
The thing is, when I was growing up, granted a long time ago, and then my children and my grandchildren, I would venture to say, even with my grandchildren who are in their 30s now, that they didn't have a cell phone.
But they do today.
They do today.
Sure.
But the cell phone cannot be a healthy replacement for interaction with people.
Absolutely not. But we've given it to all of them.
Well, here, take this. Then I don't have to bother with you.
So what do we do now?
We take
whose
those
fault
away.
is it?
We take those away. And even in the classroom, I think there should be very little use of a computer. I think it should be the teacher teaching.
But you know, Linda, and I'm not arguing with you. I have an agreement with you. But that's not going to happen.
You know that Bill Gates was on the committee that designed the Common Core curriculum.
Sure.
And then he spent millions of dollars paying off states that would incorporate the Common Core curriculum.
Yeah.
Now he has since said, "Oh, it failed."
Yeah.
Okay? But in the meantime, what happened to our children?
Sure.
So, to me, education should be the teacher has knowledge, and they are to share that knowledge with the children,
Yeah.
give them a paper test, and let them, instead of doing things on the computer, if they want to do computer at home, that's another thing.
But now with the pandemic, we've forced them to be on the computer nearly 100% of the time.
What has happened to our society?
Yeah, that's a great question. But you're not going to change it. It's going to continue down the path that it's going down. So what do we do? So if you want my solution,
Go for it.
you know, when my partner Jason lost Evan, they asked him, and this is in the book that we've written, it's an actual allegory. It's a story. It's a fictional story where we lay out these 13 pillows. But when he lost Evan, the principal showed up in his classroom and said, "I need you to go and do grief counseling in the high school." And Jason was like, I'm a phys ed teacher. I'm not a grief counselor. But he went over and he had conversations with the students about Evan and told some funny stories about Evan and had some relationship kind of discussions with the young people. Where the heck was I going with this, Linda? You got me thinking about.
Oh, gosh. He said he wanted him to come and do grief.
Yeah, he went and did grief
after
count,
he
but
lost his son.
I'm back on track here. Sorry, that happened. We got so many good topics
Welcome
going
to my
here.
club.
I know we got so many good topics going here. But when Jason got done that day, he called me on the phone, and he goes, "I know what the problem is," and this was 8 or 9 years ago. He said, "I know what the problem is." And I'm like, what? You know, the suicide issue. And before we had a lot of this stuff figured out, he said, I don't know if Evan was bullied. I don't know what his issue was. He was one of these invisible kids that just was there. But he didn't have enough sweethearts and heroes in his life. That's the issue. It's not a bullying problem. Hopelessness is always solved by sweethearts and heroes. And you say, what's a sweetheart?
Role models?
Well,
or?
sure, that's one way to look at it. But in the 16th century, the word bully meant sweetheart. It was a very endearing term.
Really?
And look it up. You'll be fascinated by it.
Okay.
You wouldn't be who you are today, Linda, if it wasn't for the people that came into your life and helped you when you needed help. They gave you this thing called hope. And that's what sweethearts do. And heroes, they jump into action and they help people when they're struggling. And really, truly, what the problem is in America today is we don't have enough sweethearts and heroes. People that give hope to other people when they see them hopeless, and people that jump into action and save them when they need to be saved.
I am so blessed to have the friends I have.
The sweethearts in your life.
Thank you, Lord. I love my family,
Yep.
of course. They're there for me, too, if I should ask, and let them know I need them. But my friends, when they call, I listen. When I call, they listen. We don't get together a lot right now because of all that's going on. But I am truly blessed.
Sure. And that's the solution right there, Linda. Nicholas Cruz, when he shot up Parkland, and excuse me if people disagree with this, he just didn't have enough sweethearts and heroes in his life. He didn't have those people that you had.
Yep.
He was on the outside searching.
This is fascinating.
Sorry I got a little heated.
No.
Can't be talking about kids.
Hey, you care. Yes, we're talking about these precious young people
Yeah.
who need the tools given to them.
That's a good way to put it. Strategies, I like to say, but tools, yeah.
Yep, for life.
Yeah.
And how to cope with things as they come along, and to have somebody come up and give you a hug. I'm a hugger too.
Yeah.
And it's just comforting
Yeah.
to hug.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel good, We're down to almost 2 minutes. So any last parting? First of all, I just want to say, come back again.
Yeah.
Because there's always more to talk about.
Tremendous.
God bless you for what you're doing to try to, help young people of all ages. And I can't imagine going around. I would love to go along and just listen sometime and see what you're doing, but that's not going to happen. So what would you like to say? Whoops. Oh, I think Norm hung up. So you got a minute and a half. Anything you want to say?
Well, just thank you. And, the only way we really solve this is by having conversations. And I don't think we do enough of
Openness.
that. Yeah, I don't think we do enough of that. And I always say understanding is not condoning. And whether I agreed with what was going on in our park or not, it was irrelevant. For me, it's about trying to understand people.
I, too, stopped at the park. I drove by, and I saw people there. There weren't a whole lot of them at the time, but I had to go and do an errand. When I came back, I drove around the park, found myself a parking space, got out of the car, and walked over to the few who were still there. And I said, "What's the problem?" And we talked for quite a while about different feelings and thoughts that we had as individuals. It was all, very comfortable. They were very educated people.
Yeah.
Because you talked with them about that. But safe travels, my friend. Keep up the good work. I can't imagine, what you're doing, but I hope you'll come out with another book. And please take every opportunity to talk with parents so that people have an understanding, and teachers. have an understanding of what's needed
Yeah.
and how to accomplish what our children need, and to give them the tools they need for a healthy life
Yep.
and a happy life. So thank you so
Thank you.
much for everything you do. Folks, thanks for tuning in. I hope you learned a lot, and we'll think about what we talked about tonight. Have a great week. Good night.